We've been hearing statistics like these with growing regularity. The top 1% of Americans controls 42% of the nation's wealth. The wage gap between CEOs and average workers has grown to 587 to 1, and the top 1% pay state taxes around 5.4%, while the bottom 20% pay almost 11%, double that of their counterparts at the top of the economic pyramid. How have we come to this place of such drastic inequality, and what can we do to restore some measure of balance? Joining me today to discuss such questions is Les Leopold, co-founder and director of the Labor Institute, a nonprofit educational organization that designs programs on occupational health and safety, the environment, and economics for unions and community groups. He is also the author of 4 books, most recently, Runaway Inequality, an activist's guide to economic justice. Welcome, Les. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's maybe actually start back a ways to understand where we are today. If the 2008 crash was something of a symptom of the inequality that we're talking about, maybe it makes sense to take a step back and look at an occasion which was similar to it. You suggest that there are parallels between 2008 and the crash of 1929 that led to the Great Depression. How are they similar? What causes did they share in your estimation?
Actually, it's kind of simple. If you take your foot off the neck of Wall Street, you will get a crash. The period leading up to the 1929 crash, Wall Street was almost entirely deregulated, and they did everything they could to boost the values of their shares, manipulate prices, deceive investors, a whole litany of features that were quite similar to what happened, at least in kind, that led up to the Great Recession. We began deregulate. Let's start in this direction. After the Great 1929 crash, everyone understood that the lack of regulation, it was like the common knowledge in Washington, was the lack of regulation caused the crash. Therefore, we need to put severe regulations on Wall Street, establish the Securities Exchange Commission, made it very hard to manipulate stocks, separated with Glass-Steagall, separated commercial banking, which became insured, that's where we put our money, and investment banking, which is much riskier, separated the two so one couldn't infect the other. This was all in place, and we had a quarter of a century of virtually no economic meltdowns. Then there was a big movement to deregulate that began in the 1970s. 1970s was a very tumultuous period. There was both inflation and unemployment, and we had the oil shocks, and we still had the vestiges of a lot of rebellion that took place in the 1970s. So something new had to come in.
Well, and actually, maybe if we can step back and tease that out a little bit. In response to the Great Depression, the president at the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, steps in and offers the New Deal, looking both to prevent crashes like that in the future, as well as restore more economic equality. So sort of, can you offer a little bit in the way of what did he do? What did he institute that shifted sort of the playing field as it existed at the time?
I want to differentiate two pieces. One is the social legislation of the New Deal that basically put a floor under working people, encouraged unions, wage and hour laws, the Wagner Act, Social Security, and so on. That plus the heavy regulation of Wall Street did two things at the same time: prevented the Wall Street gambling and collapsed the huge inequality between the super rich and everybody else. But it wasn't just Roosevelt. It was carried on in every administration all the way through Nixon. The peak of fairness in America was around 1967, 68, where the rich top 1% gap was down to about 8%. They had about 8% of the total wealth. Now they have 23%. So what we have to understand is what happened in the 70s, late 70s, that changed this ballgame. And what changed was a new economic philosophy that came in, which academics call neoliberalism. I prefer to call it the Better Business Climate because liberalism is in the word and it's confusing to people because it's not a liberal program
Right.
as we now understand the word. The Better Business Climate model had three aspects: cut taxes, especially on the wealthy, cut back regulations, and trim back the New Deal, Great Society social programs so that people would be hungrier and go out, basically be hungrier for jobs, go out and find work. And all this would come together and create an economic boom because you'd have new investment, profits, more investment, a virtuous cycle, and all boats would rise. The dirty little secret, though, of this deregulation, at the time, people were talking about airlines, trucking, telecommunications, which was even Ted Kennedy was a big advocate of that. And what they didn't realize is, when they drank that Kool-Aid of deregulation, the dark underbelly of it was deregulating Wall Street from the controls that had been put in place during the New Deal. And that turned out to be an unmitigated disaster. As those controls were pulled off, you saw, starting with Carter and interest rates for credit cards were deregulated, then the savings and loan industry was deregulated, and then all manner of stock manipulation was basically deregulated, which led to a rapacious period of corporate rating of firms, which saddled them up with debt, pushed jobs overseas. A disastrous downward cycle took place, but it was clouded over because the wealthy went along with it because that's when the gap increased. You know, another way to look at that gap you had in your intro is in 1970, it was 45 to 1. Think about what that means. One car for you, 45 for a top 100 CEO. Now, after this period of the Better Business Climate deregulating finance, we just got the latest numbers in, 844 to 1 for the top 100 CEOs, 844 cars or homes to your one. So this is a phenomenal change. The American people, by the way, still think it's about 40 to 60 to 1. They're still stuck back in 1970. So the reason we wrote this book was to get the word out so that people could understand how bad it's gotten and how dangerous it is for us.
Well, if we bring it immediately to the present, if 1929 sort of stands in some meaningful ways for 2008, if FDR's New Deal was something that helped us get beyond the inequality of pre-29, then maybe we use that as a model to look at President Obama's response in post-2008. You suggest that he and his administration missed, and we, as the American people, missed a significant opportunity to try and get our country back on a path toward greater equality. What might have been done instead of TARP, instead of the bailouts? What might have been done that would have achieved greater equality?
Basically, everything Bernie Sanders is talking about. At that moment, Wall Street was on its knees, begging for help. They were about to all go under. If there had been an organized mass movement, see, the thing is not just Roosevelt. The entire populace started to get mobilized. So you had a burgeoning labor movement. You had enormous unemployment marches going on. Marches to stop rent evictions. You had You had the Huey Long in the South with his Share the Wealth campaign. You have Upton Sinclair sort of calling for Social Security. You had stuff all over. You had people in motion. We were asleep. We were watching this on TV. And Occupy Wall Street was the first sign that we could do something. They changed the discussion. Not only did we not break up the big banks, which when we had the opportunity, and put back Glass-Steagall and a lot of other severe controls. Not only didn't we do that, but we basically accelerated inequality. You know, the growth that's taken place since that period, 95% of all the new income generated since 2008 has gone to the top 1%. So we've actually accelerated inequality. And on top of that, before Occupy Wall Street hit, President Obama was talking about an austerity program, a grand bargain with the Republicans. When Occupy Wall Street hit, the conversation changed. Austerity got taken off the table, and we are the 99% became the new meme. Unfortunately, the rest of the progressive movement stood around and watched, and Occupy Wall Street, in fact, didn't believe in organization. So in 6 months, they were toast. They were gone. We now have another such opportunity. It's going to be very interesting to see how we respond.
Well, and let's speak a little bit to, although you suggested who a candidate would be who's looking to get us towards a path of equality. Let's think about the planks for such a presidential candidate, and allowing people to make their own decisions. But what are the planks? What are the goals? What are the issues that a president who is championing greater equality amongst Americans, what is he or she going to be advancing as their vision for the country?
Well, first, I want to say that when I wrote this book, I had no idea Bernie Sanders was running. I didn't even know what his planks would be. I don't think he knows who I am. This was just parallel play going on here. But let me say that any platform for the future needs to be divided into two parts. One are the policy platforms, and the other is the mobilization you need to get it. I can give you a very nice policy platform, which is not that different from Sanders, but the chances of achieving it are zero if we don't mobilize. So I'll give you one example that I put forth about 7 years ago, which was a small financial speculation tax, a small tax on stocks, bonds, and derivatives, and then use that money to provide free higher education at all colleges and universities, 2-year to graduate school. Much as Northern Europe has virtually that program in place. They also are going to, several of those countries are going to be passing a financial transaction tax, and Britain's had one for a long time. Totally manageable, administratively, operationally, all manageable. But it's not achievable without a mass movement. And we need to learn again how the populists did this in the 1880s. They had 6,000 educators running around the country providing an analysis of their version of runaway inequality, their version of Wall Street's aggression upon them, and their solutions, which were public banking, cooperatives, public control of railroads and a means of communication. They wanted to get control over the economy, and they spread the word. We would need 30,000 such educators. This book, Runaway Inequality, is part of that educational infrastructure. And all the proceeds from this book go back into that educational campaign. And so we're trying to help, we're working with a bunch of unions and community groups to build a national economic infrastructure. And we started training trainers a couple of weeks ago. And we hope to field 100 of those 30,000 that we need by the end of the year.
Well, and you've imagined where my next question goes. Certainly, regardless of who we have as a president, and certainly the president can establish a very important policy tone and either lead or get in the way of people who want to achieve greater equality. But certainly you suggest that this is absolutely a citizen-led movement, that it's not led from the top, it's led, quote unquote, it's led from the bottom. Yes?
It requires structure.
Okay.
Occupy Wall Street feared structure. They did not like hierarchical organization of any kind, even if it was democratic. They thought that a kind of spontaneous political combustion like the Arab Spring would change the world. Well, the Arab Spring in Egypt, you got the Muslim Brotherhood. They were extremely well organized. The mass uprising was not organized. So we need structure. We need state, local, national organization, a common organization. You should be able to go anywhere from, Macon, Georgia to Arlington, Massachusetts, and be able to join a chapter and participate in political dialogue, and then be part of the process of pressuring our plutocracy. It's not a democracy anymore. Pressuring our system to be responsive. That's going to require real organization, and it requires that the progressive movement comes out of its silos. This generation, our generation, is fractured into a series of issue-oriented silos with to-do lists, and tremendously talented people are involved in these organizations, but They worry about raising money and organizing themselves. We have to make those silos porous. We have to come out of them and join together in a common movement with a common agenda, common analysis, and a common educational infrastructure. We can do it, but it's going to be very different for us.
And certainly, I think, just to clarify for viewers, the silos and the porosity you're speaking of is, we have a bunch of people focused on climate change issues. We have people focused on economic inequality. And yet, those are very allied issues insofar as frequently, there are particular communities who deal with the immediate ramifications of climate change more than others. And so these issues, rather than being separate and being able to make advances on them separately, we need to coalesce, we need to join together and make progress jointly, yes?
Right. So think about the range of organizations we have, from the environment to education to gay and lesbian rights to Black Lives Matter to labor unions to human rights organizations. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. There must be 1,001
Sure.
different issues in different kinds of organizations. The only way you can come together is if you share a common analysis that says we can't win unless we take on runaway inequality and the power of Wall Street. The environmental movement has to realize that it's going to stand still, that climate change is going to get worse if we allow this kind of runaway freight train of an economy to keep going the way it's going. People working on education have to realize that the financial elites who are trying to destroy teachers unions and set up charter schools and whatnot, that effort is connected to the broader issue of runaway inequality. If we share a common analysis, then we can build a common movement. But we can't just do it by sort of horse trading and coalition building and you work on my issue, I'll work on your issue. And we can't do it by staying separate. This is going to be very, very hard for many groups who have a tremendous vested feeling about their identity issue. To broaden that issue to say, yes, I care about the environment, but I also care about runaway inequality, and I'm going to participate at that higher level, as it were. That's going to require growth on our part, political growth. That kind of growth took place in the 1930s. By the way, it started to take place also in the 1960s. It was a real threat to the established order, the way in which movements ranging all the way from the anti-war movement to civil rights to Ralph Nader were challenging the way corporate capitalism worked. And financial and corporate elites responded. That's how we got that bitter business climate model. Now we have to respond in a coherent way. We have the talent to do it, but it requires a consciousness leap. And this book is actually designed to show how these various issues are interconnected. That's why that's why we call it a guide, an activist guide, because each kind of activist has to see that they have skin in this game, the broader game.
So certainly what we need to do then is we need to educate ourselves. Certainly reading Runaway Inequality is a perfect start or a continuation. We need to join with other people on these issues. We need to try to press our legislators and elect legislators who are responsive to those issues. Yes? And I think, what's that? Yeah.
The step that's missing in there, what we need right now is we need a group of people to begin planning what after Bernie looks like, win or lose. We need to have the outlines of this is what our national structure is going to look like. This is how we're going to be organized. This is how we're going to raise money for it. We're going to have a due structure or not. We're going to have state and local chapters. They will do the work that you just described. In other words, the work of going out and pressing the legislatures and pushing for an agenda. We need some way to have a national organization. It's kind of funny, in the 60s, you get three people in a room, and next thing you knew, you had national organization, national mobilization. I mean, SDS was this tiny little thing. It called for a demonstration. It was praying it could get a few thousand people. It got 50,000. Then you had these national mobilizations. A few hotshots from some universities got together. They got 1 million people out for a march on Washington. Forming national organizations seemed to be like our birthright at that point. We've kind of forgotten that. We got this sort of small is beautiful attitude about our particular organization, but we can't win that way. We need something big.
Do we have an umbrella organization forming that would take on that leadership that you're speaking to?
Not yet. I think we're going to have a competition amongst various organizations to fill that role. But I think whatever happens is it's got to be perceived as new. It's got to be something new that grows out of the Sanders effort. If he wins, then that's the group that has to pressure the political. That's the formation of the political revolution. If he loses, I'm sure he'll be involved, but there has to be many, many other people involved. And no, I don't see a heir apparent. I know some very good groups that might turn that way, but I don't see it quite yet.
And who are they? Who, just for people to get a sense of what's out there and maybe take a look.
There's a formation called Working Families Party that has structures in many states, and I'm sure it would like to go that way. There are some groups I can't even remember what they're calling themselves, but there's some groups that are inside of the Sanders campaign that are coalitions of labor and religious organizations that also think that they have the wherewithal to carry this forward. But here's the key. There are going to be over 2 million donors to the Sanders campaign. There are going to be tens of thousands of people who volunteered and are activists. That's what you need to build upon. Those are the people, the new people that you can bring in to an organization. I don't really care what organization ends up being the infrastructure. As long as we're reaching out to those 2 million little donors and all those wonderful activists that are door knocking, and even the staff people that may be getting paid. These people are dedicated to this broader idea. That's what you can build upon.
Could you take just a minute, Les, to speak to those items you feel are central to helping reduce the inequality that the inequality we're currently experiencing, and from the book, it's living wage, it's maximum wage, it's free college education, it's those things that are part of your solutions to getting back to a place of greater equality.
Yeah, let me focus on it this way with a little bit of a lead up. Between World War II and 1980, there was no premium for working on Wall Street. In other words, given your experience, your education, and so on, whether you work for J.P. Morgan Chase or whether you work for General Motors, it didn't matter. You got approximately the same amount of income. After that, there was this enormous jump in from deregulation of finance. Working on Wall Street, you earn twice as much, 3 times, 4 times as much as non-financial sector. So the money got to Wall Street by 2007, just before the crash. 40% of all corporate profits were on Wall Street, even though only 5% of the workforce was there. We got to get it back. It got there through a process that I described in the book called financial strip mining. We got to get it back. So the ways to get it back are obviously a high marginal income tax. I mean, during the Eisenhower administration, it was up to 90%, went down to 70% by Nixon. I mean, we could certainly get it way up there again. That would help. But the financial transaction tax is absolutely key because it moves money from the financial sector into what we call the real economy. In addition, we have to do something about the money that's parked offshore. By some estimates, it's roughly $21 trillion of corporate and individual wealth that's parked offshore. And we're losing about $150 billion a year in taxation. We got to bring that back. Those two things would be fantastic. You know, Switzerland had an interesting idea. They tried to pass a referendum called 12 to 1. They said that no CEO should earn more than 12 times the average employee of his or her company. And it was neck and neck going down the stretch in that referendum. And then they did lose 2 to 1, but 1 million people voted for it. If you ask the American people what they think a fair ratio is, a strong Republican says, when you have them calculate the numbers, it comes out to be 12 to 1. A strong Democrat says 5 to 1 for an average of 8 to 1. Now, another plank in this whole proposal that's critical is our public banks. Bank of North Dakota, a populist relic, by the way, owned by the people of North Dakota. It's a civil service job. The guy who runs it makes 260 grand a year. It's the most profitable bank in the country. And the ratio between the top earner and the average worker is 8 to 1, just what the American people think is fair. They lost no money during the Great Crash. They provide, for every $100,000 they loan out, they demand that one new job is created in the state of North Dakota. We need 49 more public banks. Every state should have one. And that would also go to a long way of draining some of the wealth away from the most unequal institutions in the world, which are the financial institutions on Wall Street.
There is unquestionably, having given a very close read to Runaway Inequality, there is loads more we could talk about. Time, however, is somewhat limited. So before we go, I want to ask you if there's anything else that we haven't talked about that you feel would be vital for viewers to understand, either about the sort of the history and the backdrop, or where we might be headed in terms of inequality.
I think I want every viewer to know that they can become part of this campaign. They can. This book, for example, is designed with questions at the end of every chapter for book clubs, for discussions, for high school classes, junior college classes. They can become educators themselves. They can become part of this educational infrastructure. There are endless tasks for us all to do, and we all can be part of what I think would be a grand solution. It may take a generation for us to get there. What Bernie's talking about is going to take a long time to happen, but it can happen if we all find a way to get involved, and that's what we're urging people to do.
Well, and if we look at, late 70s to early 80s, that really being the period where there was a sort of a tectonic shift in how we thought about money and how to protect or not protect American workers, that's not such a long time. And perhaps we could send things the other direction in a similar amount of time, huh?
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears.
Well, Les, I thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for writing Runaway Inequality, and for your larger body of work with the Labor Institute.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. At the top of this interview, I quoted the ratio of 587 to 1 to describe the incomes of top CEOs to those of average American workers. The hopeful news is that most Americans do not support such a wide expanse between the bottom and top of our income ladder. In fact, surveys suggest the differences more along the lines of 12 to 1 are as wide as we think appropriate. Maybe we believe any larger gap is simply unjust, or perhaps intuitively we sense that democracy is disserved by larger differences. Whatever the reason, our work is clear. For Les Leopold, I'm Peter Bermudez for Arlington Public News.